One thing's for sure, the plyometrics affect not just the counter movement jump, but all vertical jumping, right? So plyometrics, and even those without a stretch shortening cycle, right? Like a squat jump. So that plays into counter movement jumps as well as the plyometrics that play into squat jumping too. So that gives you an idea that plyometrics are they're effective, right? They're working on that stretch cycle that's important. And again, as we talked about earlier, lower body extensor strength really is a marker for making things better in that area. And it's pretty simple. I mean, I think the deadlifts and the Olympic lifts would be the go-to for sure. It has been to my program in terms of quantifying, getting those things to be good for us. But there's also squats and lunges, front and back, step ups, and all those things. Those are important too, right?
Good evening. My name is Michael Macri, and I'm Director of Performance Science with Biomechanics. So we're excited to be joined by Bob Alejo this evening for our second webinar. Before we get started, I've got our colleague Evan Magnuson, one of our co-founders, just wants to say a few words.
Good evening. Good to see y'all. I'm the co-founder of Valor. Excited to have you guys here. It means a lot to see you guys here. Welcome to the Valor community. We got a lot of good educational content. Just like you, I'm very excited to see what Bob Alejo has to share with us this evening.
Awesome. Thanks there, Evan. So again, appreciate you guys joining us. We had a really great first webinar with Jess Ellis. You can find that webinar on our YouTube channel. But yeah, we're really dedicated to trying to provide with strength coaches, athletic trainers, sports scientists, like the best of education, whether it be from a biomechanics standpoint or to play, sports performance. So obviously we're really blessed to have someone. At Valor, we're really dedicated to trying to provide, whether it be strength coaches, athletic trainers, sports scientists, like the best of education, whether it be from a biomechanics standpoint, a return to play, sports performance. So obviously we're really blessed to have someone like Bob joining us tonight and doing his presentation. For those that don't know Bob, he's had more than 40 years of experience. He's been in the D1 collegiate environment. He's worked in Major League Baseball with the US Olympic team in both coaching and senior administrative roles. Bob has been a mentor to me, and I'm sure he's been a mentor to quite a few within the strength and conditioning world, and for those that are either joining us now or listening to it later. So really excited to have him here. No doubt we'll get a really open and honest conversation tonight. So thanks for joining us, Bob. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be online here, and I see some familiar names. Dr. Stodden's with us, who has helped me a lot in throwing mechanics in Major League Baseball. So, David, good to see you on, and it looks like there's a couple of Davids on here. So, I'm excited to get going. It's a topic that's important to me, and having been around some of the world's fastest runners just at UCLA alone in the track and field program there, I really got tutored when I, started my career out in the early '80s by the right folks. I know about jumping higher and running faster, so we can talk about that.
Awesome. Looking forward to it, Bob. So if you want to begin sharing your screen as Bob is getting his presentation ready, for those who are on the call, like it'll be around about 40 minutes long. After there'll be like a brief discussion, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Seems to be a very small, intimate group tonight, so should have pretty good discussion. But for those of you that are here and you want to ask any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And yeah, and Bob will get to as many of those questions as we can at the end. So Bob, take it away.
Really, the title should be changed into, running faster and jumping higher. And the reason I say that is because most everybody, particularly developmental athletes, will run faster and jump higher with just the right physical preparation. And that's important to know. I also wouldn't jump out there, trying to get that 4.440 or that 43-inch vertical jump that you see some athletes do and say, okay, we're going to head towards that. I think the first thing that you do, and this is with any data you're collecting about any performance numbers, is to get your own data better first. To try to get your vertical jumps higher, try to get your runs faster. And then eventually you'll ease your way into some better places. I also say that, for the most part, if you're not a track athlete and you're not very fast and you don't jump very high, typically it's because you're just a bad runner and a bad jumper. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? There's nothing more than that because, track and field people are very technically sound. That's what they do. When we talk about this a little bit, we really want to talk in relative terms for the jumping faster. And, if you're weak, get stronger. you'll jump higher and run faster. If you're strong enough to be fast or to jump high and you're not, maintain that strength level and try to work on speed of movement. So really, you're just trying to feed the power equation. But all the while you're working on that, you want to repetitively work on the big aspects. These days, people want to make those 1% gains when they jump over the fact that somebody's running and their arms are going side to side, right? Or they're jumping and their arms are going down instead of up. I mean, just simple things can change that. You also got to realize that every athlete's got a ceiling. And some of those ceilings are lower than others. You're just working on, a robust athlete, one, to try to mitigate injury, and two, to try to, make an effort to reduce a sprint time and increase a jump. And for that, for athletic performance, the basics always work. There's no getting around it. They've worked forever. They'll continue to work forever. So let's talk about running faster. Well, this is slow motion, but I think it's important to notice that that lead leg hits the ground and it's pretty stiff. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I mean, stiffness is talked about enough. Also, we talk about 90 degree at the elbow. Now, I do teach that, but it's almost metaphoric, right? You want to make sure your arms are in a position where they don't spend a whole lot of time chopping up and down. But this angle here on the upswing of the arm is about right. So it's not 90 degrees, and we know that for sure. And that's just biomechanics and the science. Peter Weyand is the guy who completely changed the face of locomotion. And I say locomotion because he's done a lot of studies with animals. So he's not only looked at animals, but he's also looked at humans. And this paper in 2000 really changed everybody's mind, right? To find out that, that part of what everybody thought it took to run fast, which was stride length and stride frequency, only one of those was really true. And in this case, it's greater ground forces, not the speed of movement, were the key factors in running fast. And as he concluded later on in this, it was not by repositioning their limbs in the air, but by applying greater forces to the ground. So it was a combination of both those things. But what was really peculiar about that was that slower people don't have that much difference in positioning their limbs than world-class athletes. And he saw this in the lab with exactly that, the fastest athletes in the world doing those things. But one of the things that is also striking is that the major force in all of sprinting is vertical. A lot of people think it's horizontal, but vertical forces in running are higher than horizontal forces the entire time. Although out of the blocks, the horizontal force is a little more higher because you're starting at zero velocity, and that's really the only part that pure strength really helps in running. And the ground reaction forces are 5 to 10 times that of horizontal forces, really at top speed. And when we talk about top speed, we're not talking about the entire run. There's really two parts to a major sprint, and that's acceleration and top speed. The two are different, and their mechanisms of speed are different. How you achieve top speed is a completely different mechanism than how you achieve top acceleration. And that's going to be important later on. They also end up finding out that it's mass-specific ground reaction forces. In other words, it's about force and body mass in the relationships. We don't see a lot of world-class runners who are 240 and 250. And there's a reason for that, because it would take an unbelievable amount of force, and there's already enough created at world-class speeds that it would just be almost impossible for that to happen. So, body mass is really important there, and it's also important in vertical jumping. And at top speed, which is another kind of, I wouldn't say it's a myth, but it might be a misconception, that limb strength is not critical at top speed. It's something that's happening so fast and so rapidly. It's coming out of the hip, and that force will drop onto the ground, and then repetitively doing that. That's exactly how things happen. And here's a little clip from their study in 2010 about two people repositioning their legs. Is not that much different. We're looking at 0.02 difference between a subject and the fastest sprinter in the world. So again, he wrote, and it's the truth, despite the widespread belief, it's not a more rapid repositioning of the limbs that contribute very little to faster top speeds of swifter runners. It's It's the idea of the combination of the both. It's dropping down quick, putting it down and picking it up as fast as you can do it. As time goes on, the rate of foot contacts increases, and so does the force into the ground. And in the beginning, I mean, you can see that the graph is showing, 2.8 strides per second, and out of that, you're getting 4 meters per second, and then not just 2 seconds later, it's more than doubled. And so that's what tells you for sure that even though my repositioning rate is likely the same as Usain Bolt's, when he hits the ground, the force into the ground is so dynamic that he's way down the track. Helps you appreciate what kind of forces these sprinters are putting out. One thing I'd like to tell you while I'm thinking about this, the Pacey Performance podcast by Sportsmith, Peter Wayand does an unbelievable job explaining all this in a little more lay terms, but it's hard to talk in lay terms about the biomechanics because, it's a science, right? So, but the name of it is the speed training, what we know, what we think, what we know, and what is a good guess. So that's a place that you can go. It's about an hour and some odd minutes, and it's worth every second. So with that information, what do we do, right? I mean, so we're basically working with non-track athletes, and so then you can also assume that good runners or not, you got to sprint them full speed and full recovery, and you also have to go sprint speed and full effort with a work to rest ratio for speed endurance, right? And that's one of the things that's important in a 100-meter sprint, even though it's the fastest sprint, is that there is amount of speed endurance at the end. It's who holds on the most. And what's funny is, we talk about starting strength and acceleration. Usain Bolt doesn't come flying out of the blocks, but because of his body type and how much force is into the ground, his fastest speeds are at 60 and 80 meters. So that tells you that he's holding on a lot longer and creating more longer than the others. But really, it's, you still got to get them in shape. And one thing that full speed sprinting does, whether you're good at it or not, is it teaches your body full speed. In other words, nobody's pulling a hamstring at 70%, right? Nobody's doing that. So you got to make sure that they can do that. And what I meant by sprint speed and full effort is speed endurance, right? Just endurance in general. So when you're training, you have to perform enough work so that it's still full effort. It's just not full speed. And because that happens, especially in soccer. And you hear about stiffness, and plyometrics are the ones for that. It's about landing quickly, not giving in, keeping on the balls of your feet, and getting off the ground as fast as you can. And part of that is you don't want hypertrophy. You don't want to add extra weight because you may come to a place where that extra weight's going to cost you. At the same time, the acceleration phase favors that sort of work. So you have to figure out how you can go heavy and still be careful of not creating too much muscle, or rather too much extra body mass. And generally speaking, for me, I don't, and again, I've been around the greatest runners in the world and the greatest sprint coaches in the world, and I know what that looks like. And I will say this, that's not who we work with unless you're with track and field. Most of the time, we're working with non-track athletes, and the easiest thing to fix outside of getting stronger if you're weak is running economy. And what I mean is, the economics behind getting from one point to another. In other words, if you're going side to side, it's hard to go as fast as you can forward because you got effort in other directions. Posture, shoulders back, head up, vertical, making sure your stride's not too long, you're not reaching out because that's braking, you're actually stopping yourself from going fast. And then the vertical posture has really come into play much more now than it has in the past. The other thing I look at is first step speed. I mean, if you look at sport in general, and I'm not saying people aren't running 30, 40, 70 meters. We see it in football, we see it in soccer. But at the same time, success comes with first step speed, right? Stealing a base. First step speed means if I can get my player to get one ball length in front of the guy marking him, I can get that pass connected and I can score. Crossover dribbles, that's a one-step effort. And you can't, in a short distance, you can't catch up if somebody's got one step. So I just do a 20-meter sprint assessment with a 10-yard and a two 10-yard splits at 20 meters, right? Two 10-yard splits at 20 yards or two 10-meter sprints at 20 meters. And here's one of the reasons why. And probably the most outstanding reason is that at longer distances, the skill of running becomes a factor. And as we know, we're not with track athletes, so I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how fast can I get you in a short area. So I don't want the data to get crazy. And we'll talk about not using arms when we jump for assessments. We do in volleyball because that's important, but we also do no arms with PVC pipes because jumping is a skill, and the arms could contribute between 10 and 20% of a total jump. So we want to take that out of the action and look what the lower body has done. And then you just stick with just fundamentally sound lower body exercises, mostly, if not in total, extension. So let's talk to stiffness a little bit. The vertical component has to be there, and the rotary piece is what happens at the hip. That's more of a biomechanical term. As Peter Wayan told me, it's not necessarily rotary as we know, like the rotary movement. But that, we talk about the rotary hip movement in the clean, and that's really just kind of a forward sort of move, and it's really what's happening at the hip. But it's balls of the feet, short ground contact time. And the overhead running thing, I used to look at people run and I used to think, why the hell are they doing that? I don't get what that means. I mean, we should be able to, but what it does, if you look at that picture, he's straight up and down. So anything he's delivering is going vertical. And you can do that with almost every drill. But the simple stuff is one leg horizontal hops, pogo hops, 2 foot, 1 foot bounding, any kind of additional or otherwise vertical and horizontal jump. But again, what you're looking at is that foot to hip, and you're looking at ground contact with little or no knee flexion or extension, hip flexion or extension, or ankle flexion or extension. You want to hit that thing and go again into that cycling motion. And that's what this is. It really comes to light. That's really very key. And that should be involved all the time. And you can do those drills in warm-ups. It doesn't have to be a 30-minute session anywhere. So let's talk about jumping higher, right? Again, we just talked about it. Jumping's a skill, particularly when the arms are included, right? And so there's timing involved. And that's another piece of it, let alone, are your knees going forward when you jump? Are you doing more hip oriented or, quad dominant jumping, sort of things like that. So, those are things that may or not be fixed, but something you have to look at as an intervention. But jumping has tons of standard information. I mean, I think David will tell you, Stodden, that I mean, you can find out the jumping of a complete cohort from probably 8 years old to 60 years old, what that looks like and what that means. So, you can always have some sort of mark as to what direction you should be going in. But, when you look at jumping, and you look at this fellow on the side. Now, this is Valor, right? They're tracking him right here. And this is important. I put this one in slow motion because so you can watch things. And one of the things I noticed that this guy, when I put it up there, his left shoulder from our view is the right side, but it dips when he lands. And that's something I would take that you wouldn't see normally, that, without this thing, and you go, whoa, what is that for? So who knows? It could be that opposite hamstring, could be the same hamstring, could be lots of things. But anyway, if you look at the variables of jumping, I mean, there's lots of stuff to look at there, right? So it's not as simple as you think. But you can't spend a lot of time on that, just like you can't spend a lot of time on running mechanics because there's only so much time for practice and weightlifting and conditioning. And then now you're talking about the minutia really for non-track athletes. But what does the science say? I mean, there's some science on how to jump and all that, but they're just basically looking at different jumps and the effects of different training on different jumps. But one thing's for sure, the plyometrics affect not just the counter movement jump, but all vertical jumping, right? So plyometrics, and even those without a stretch shortening cycle, right? Like a squat jump. So that plays into counter movement jumps as well as the plyometrics that play into squat jumping too. So that gives you an idea that plyometrics they're effective, right? They're working on that stretch cycle that's important. And again, as we talked about earlier, lower body extensor strength really is a marker for making things better in that area. And it's pretty simple. I mean, I think the deadlifts and the Olympic lifts would be the go-to for sure. It has been to my program in terms of quantifying, getting those things to be good for us. But there's also squats and lunges, front and back, step ups, and all those things. Those are important too, right? And now we also know that we thought about it a lot, but didn't spend a lot of time on it. I saw a lot of Europeans come into the weight room in January at UCLA back in the day. Patrick Joberg and some of these really good jumpers were handling, 140, 150, 160 kilos on one-legged step-ups, but they weren't really high. And I used to think back then, in the early 80s, like, well, that's not really developing any leg stuff. But really what they were doing was developing that last little high jump step, which happens at 150, 160 degrees, somewhere in there. But it works. Those can happen. And I have an example of that for sure. That example is, let me see if I can go back here. Let's just go forward. That one example is I had a junior college player of the year come to NC State play basketball. Couldn't get him into a squat of any sort. It was a quarter squat. That's as deep as I could get him. Feet close, feet wide, toes pointed out, opening the hips. Now he could go down and grab a bar to power clean and power pull, and he did that well. So that was happening as well. But what's curious to me was he came in jumping 38 inches. So I said, he's going to squat. So I took a 1RM of a quarter squat and just prescribed the same program for him that I did to the others in the regular squat as the cycles were going in season, out of season, and all that. Ended up putting 5 more inches on there and jumping 43 inches. So, you don't have to do a full squat to jump higher. Now, granted, we had been pulling from the floor, but that's another exercise, right? It's lower body, yes, but it kept me in mind to like think, okay, so this could happen, and now we know that we've seen that research. Jumping research, when you look at force reduction because of fatigue, which we're trying to figure out what is actually some of these mechanisms, it seemed as if in Mora's work in 22 that it didn't really decrease the jump height, which lets you know that the jump does not depend, exclusively on force, which is to say, and you see this in force plates, there's tons of jump strategies. I again, my own personal experience, I saw somebody jump on the force mat at the Just Jump match, which we use twice a week. We did baseline them with and tested with the force plates, but this was something that we could, that was reliable. It just wasn't valid, but we saw these numbers set a record on his vertical jump, but he had a pulled hamstring. So I thought, well, this thing is better than I thought. But when I looked on the force plate, he had changed his jump strategy. And so, and you could see clearly that the one leg that was injured was not active. So, don't be fooled by the numbers. You got to make sure you look at some of that to be sure. But again, jump strategies, you know, people that are great athletes and they figure out other strategies to run fast and jump high while they can still play. Cormy did a great study, and it happened to be, if you notice at the bottom in yellow, latest in strength and conditioning, ACSS 2013 keynote. Great video on why strength is important in developing and creating power. They did a study on stronger athletes that in the 1RM squat were squatting almost twice body weight, that those athletes loaded and better handled the eccentric phase and came out faster from that and also created greater force to jump higher than the weaker athletes. And so it's good to know that the jump, your strength is really important. And that strength, concentric strength for sure, made a difference coming into the eccentric phase. So, oftentimes we see people talking about, hey, we got to train eccentric strength. And, negatives are important and they work. But people have lost sight of the fact that if you're increasing concentric strength, your eccentric strength is increasing as well. I mean, so you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. Now, that's one of the strategies that I would use with really, really strong, experienced lifters going into eccentric stuff, going into isometric stuff to try to boost them out of just the normal training. But, again, I think that what you understand there is that the stronger athlete is going to be able to react better to eccentric mechanisms and then come out of them quicker too. And so now we've got, more velocity, which means a better jump height. Simply put, this is a vertical jump and standing long jump program that I've used, I mean, since day one. It's not that hard, especially again with developmental. Gets a little more fancy when you get more experienced and stronger and at higher levels. But, really, you got anywhere between a 16 to 20-week cycle here of jumping, of plyometrics, right? And it's simple to go, right? Simple to go. You have moving and in place, but here's just a basic vertical jump, 2 legs, single response, jump up, down, stop, jump up, down, stop. 2 legs multi-response, which would be jump, 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 jump without a pause. Then you do the same thing with 1 leg, right? Jump up, down on 1 leg, stop, and then repetitively on 1 leg. And that cycle could be as simple as, week one, beginning with 2 sets of 5, and then 3 sets of 5, 4 sets of 5, 5 sets of 5, and then a downside at 2 sets of 5. That would be considered a 4 up and 1 down progression. Could be 3 up and 1 down, but that's a solid 4 to 5 month program that you could emphasize and get a lot of quality out of, because now you have a repetitive technique that you're going to learn how to do, and then you have the responses with it. Same with the standing long jump, no difference. Single response long jumps, multi-response jumps, and those multi-response jumps could be even longer than that. You can start out with double jumps, triple jumps, quadruple jumps, quintuple. I mean, it could go on for as long as you want. But it's real simple. And as you see, so far, I've been talking about simplistic approaches. But when I talk to great coaches, great track coaches, great biomechanists, great scientists, they all say the same thing. You know, Ken Clark, who's in Peter Wayand's group, got his PhD underneath him. When I said, "Hey, what are you doing um, technique wise or training wise with some of these people?" And he's like, he starts laughing. He says, I mean, the same stuff, right? Tuck jumps, long jumps, vertical jumps, box jumps, hurdle hops, nothing spectacular. And it just seems to me that the mundane and basic done great. And we've heard it before, but I'm here to tell you that after 40 something years, it works and it's going to continue to work. So running faster and jumping higher, what can you summarize there? Well, I think they're both related to force and body mass, right? You don't have a lot of 300-pound guys jumping 35 inches. At the same time, the smaller athlete's going to jump higher, but the force output is going to be a little different too. So that's part of looking at what you're trying to do with getting athletes to run faster and jump higher. The other part is, statistically, and again, scientists will agree, scientists who are coaches, which is the posse I have, who are not only in the lab, but they're actually coaching that. They'll say like, well, I mean, it wasn't at the significant level, but it was a positive outcome. And so I say, don't just blow it away because the level was insignificant, because you're talking about a tip pass and that ball analogy I gave you. If it's going to help you, if it looks like it's going to help you, try it. I think you should try it. I shouldn't just dismiss it because the science analytically says it's not great. It still could be beneficial. I would add that, with developmental athletes, training for strength is training for power for those athletes because they're weaker. Again, force times distance over time. I think what we've lost fact of with this velocity-based training stuff is not that it's valuable, it is, but many coaches are doing too much of it and then they lose strength. And so over the course of time, and even in a study that Robert Newton did, and he talks about it in that video, there was muscle loss doing an 8-week study because they were doing so much power training. There was no strength to feed the side that matters as much as the formula, right? You have to have some force. So in these athletes that are younger and weaker, for me, when we had freshmen coming in, and things have changed now, but it's been, a few years. But when I had a freshman come in, they would deadlift in the same position that David Riegert was, I showed you earlier in this presentation, for 6 to 8 months. So they could rip the bar off the ground, so that when we went to go power clean, they wouldn't be using 25-pound plates on each side. We could start with heavy weight or heavier than that weight. But every one of those kids who back squatted and maybe front squatted if somehow the back squat didn't work for him, and deadlifted off the ground, Olympic style, right? So head and hips were coming up at the same time, right? They're coming up at the same time. And so that's important. They all ran faster and jumped higher with that simple developmental process. So this is something that's important too. And I'm trying to find this. I called Meg Stone the other night, and she thought Mike might have a copy of this. But I remember hearing about this when I was at UCLA when this study came out about measurement of world-class throwers. So they had all the numbers, the clean, snatch, jerk, squat, bench press, incline press. They were just phenomenal numbers. And these guys were well over 100 kilos, approaching more in the 260, 270 range. But that entire group that they took all these anthropometric measurements and strength and performance characteristics from, at that body weight with all that strength in some of those ballistic movements, were jumping 30 inches and standing long jumping 10 feet. And now that's elite, right? And they were also sprinting 10-yard distance at the level that some of the fastest humans were running. Now, probably 5 more yards and they're out of the race, right? But what this is trying to tell you is the importance of just overall strength and power in a short little distance in time, which is what we mostly work with in athletics. The basketball court isn't 50 yards long, it's short. The tennis court isn't 50 yards long, it's short. And most of the work in soccer can be done in lengths, but when speed and power are important, usually goals ensue. So that's happening when it's short, especially when we know that sprint performance in soccer is only 2 to 5% of the entire match. So, it doesn't happen much, but when it happens, it can change the course of a game. So I wanted to make sure you knew about that. The other thing I wanted to tell you was that we did testing at NC State with our basketball team, and it was the test that they did in the NBA. It was called BAM testing. And so what I ended up doing was having them come down, hired them to do this basketball specific training. And that included the approach jump, the no step jump, four-way agility, which was the old box, right? Sprint, lateral, back pedal, lateral, and then repeat it as soon as you touch, all through timing gates. Reaction shuttle was basically your 5-10-5, but it was with a light that would tell you that you go that way, then you would go. You did 2 of those, and the reaction was that when you checked into it, it had a bracelet. You checked into it, you had 10 seconds, and you could be asked to perform your movement between 2 and 10 seconds. So you were frozen, didn't know where it was going to go, didn't know which way it was going to go. 3/4 court sprint, right? It's just basically that, 75% of the court. So I had them cross all that up and do a correlation matrix. If you go down here and you take four-way agility, and then you look across, you get the total BAM score, you get a negative correlation of 0.93, which is the highest score on this entire board. So what does that mean? It means as the time in the four-way agility went down, the total BAM score went up. So what this is saying is the four-way agility was the best predictor of the total BAM score. So let's talk about that for a minute. And this is great because like Degrassi Tyson says, the good thing about science is that it's true whether or not you believe in it, right? So you can't have your own science. And this is the science. This is a physiology gem right here. So you're sprinting, you're jumping, you're changing direction, right? You're backpedaling. We know that people who run fast jump high. We know that people that jump high run fast in a short order. All those things happen in the four-way agility. If you're running fast, probably jump high. If you run fast, if you change direction and you're sharp, that means you're strong, both eccentrically and concentrically. So all those things are included here. So just in that short little, so they used the whole lane from foul line to baseline. So it was the pro lane agility. So it was a little bit longer than college. All I needed to do was one test to figure it out if we were supposed to be. So that tells you right there the physiology behind running fast and jumping high and strength. I mean, that's a big key. So let's change course here just a little bit. And what I want to talk about is leadership. Is I got to get my little leadership spill out there. So we talk about leadership and what's happening, and most of the failures of systems and processes is leadership, right? It's not necessarily the strength coach. And if he's not very good, who hired him, right? That's where the flaw is. So leadership isn't a look. It's not a resume. The resume says what you did and where you were when you did it. But it's not exactly leadership. What it is, though, and this is Stanley McChrystal, who led us into Afghanistan and was the leader there. He says it's a set of characteristics and behaviors. It's not a process. It's not an outcome. It's not wins and losses. It's a set of characteristics and behaviors like selflessness and maturity. And so that's important to know. And when you get to the elements of leadership, the number one thing you have as a leader is being trustworthy. Now, I'm getting to this thing about performance practitioners. All those things you got to have, right? You got to be trusting. It's like all of us, in our group of friends that are close to us or people that we really enjoy being around, we don't distrust any of those people. I don't have anybody in my group that I don't trust. Now, everybody's got their flaws, right? We all are, but being trusted is important. You got to be present, got to inspire, you got to be facilitative. You got to be the kind of leader that says, "Hey, Michael, what can I do for you? How can I make you great so you make us all great?" It's not about bossing people around. It's about looking at somebody and making them feel like they're the only person in the room. That's what we do. That's what we always do, right? We empower them. We give them power to make decisions. We make it seem like if somebody says something, that it means something to us. It's about simplicity and not complexity, which we're trying to talk about here. And again, it kind of carries over into a lot of things. If you look at the Harvard Business Review, they often talk about some of the mundane visions have created millionaires. It doesn't have to be original. It has to fit for the the constituency, the people you're trying to head to. And visionary, there's no doubt about that. So in the end, if you look at this right here, what kind of role is good for us? How can we push the profession? Everybody complains about the profession, but what are you doing to make it better, right? That, look at all the things we've been around through our careers that we have understood, right? We were the nutritionists. We got a little psychology going. We're doing return to play. We're, digesting the data and forming technological advances and creating things like Valor for people to look at. And so, they say it's a logical fit, and I agree. And Gillette took that larger into that same paper and said, look at all the things, athletic training, organizational management, as well as we'd be involved with coaching coaches that none of these other people do, right? Yeah, well, they seem to see still hiring the same sort of person that they think might affect in such a positive way. In this paper that Matt Teenan and I wrote, we talked about the transdisciplinary collaboration. Speak the same language, share the data, and agree upon what's going to happen. Anybody who threatens that is out. That's just that simple, right? And that's where we've seen problems in places that we've all worked at. So we want to make sure that the transdisciplinary one team approach and high performance, you can take a look and read this yourself. Aspire to that. If you want to change the profession, aspire to being the leader, being the senior associate athletic director in charge of all the performance unit, being the assistant general manager, that sort of things. That's where we can really make a difference. And I think there's many leaders out there. Leader's not a title. It's not a role. If people are following you, you're a leader, and all we do is have people that we want to take places that they can't go by themselves. That's what makes us the candidate for that. Listen, thank you for everybody being here. I really appreciate that. I mean, I think it says a lot about Valor and what they're doing, and people are being part of it. And perhaps somewhere along the line, I've helped somebody. And, if I look at Evan and Michael, they've been great to me over the last couple of years. And, I trust that what they're doing is doing a good thing, or I wouldn't put my name on it. So that's going to be good. So, Michael, I think it's about your time.
No, thanks, Bob. Really appreciate that. That was a really, really awesome presentation. I do have a couple of questions before we open it up to how do you approach your speed training for high school and college athletes when you have a variance in maturation across the roster? And then the second part of that is at the pro level where there are people like the athletes, sorry, that have an extended period of time, what does your ramp up protocol look like to get them back to top speed because, as you know, they have a very short period of time.
All right, so let's get two quicks there. The first one was, I want to see somebody jog. I can tell if somebody's fast if they jog because they got tempo. And most of the time, you'll see somebody that is arrhythmic on a jog. They're not doing anything different when they sprint. When you just see them with their arm carries, just, and you can hear that bang, bang, that's where you start. You start with that, and then you just start increasing the speed and the distance a little bit. But I mean, again, with non-track athletes, you just work on arm carry. Watch them run, and then you can. And if you go, and the reason I like jogging is because you can get stand at the 50-yard line, let's say on a football field, and you get to watch them. It's just a continuous run. And you can watch what they do, and you can see them, and you can stand in front of them as they're running at you because they're running really slow, and then you can turn around and watch them go behind you, and then you can stand from the side. That's where you start with it. And then, it's about getting a little fit and making sure the strength program is in line. So it's really just, the basics of the basics. The ramp up for me with a pro athlete or somebody who's come back, we really never really, soccer's an example. Like we never really stop. I mean, you can continually do 5-yard sprints and not overload your body, right? But at some point, you want that to be at least part of it where you can at least be quick out of the gate, and the top speed stuff is more of a conditioner and at times, depending on how fast you're running and if you're into bounding, I call that, working on the strength of the run. But, it's just simple. There's no real trick to it. I mean, unless you want to start getting it down to times. But again, when the only people that really got their speed down by times are track athletes. So you know how fast the 100 is, you can tell how fast the 50, the 20, the 70, and all that. With these other athletes, I really like only three speeds. I like jog, stride, and sprint. And that's really all you need. And the stride is really more like an 80% run. Um, Let them leg it out a little bit, but it keeps it simple that way.
Obviously, you touched upon jumps, and as you know, across the whole board, every organization has some sort of force plate. So we're doing a lot of jumping in the weight room, right? But in the actual sports setting, takeoffs and landings are very highly reactive and reflex driven, right? But when you go across the country, I know I've visited a lot of colleges and I've come from a college football background myself. You see a lot of controlled progressions like snap downs, like hop and sticks, like pause landings, um, that are happening everywhere. It's almost like an oxymoron to what is actually happening out in the real world
Well,
of sport.
yeah.
Do you see these as necessary skill builders? And if so, like when do you think that if we are using them, that they start to sort of detrain that reactivity that's so important? And then the second part to that is how would you then progress athletes from that controlled skill building drill, if you will, to more reactive plyos without losing, what is intended outcome?
I think the snap downs and all that, I mean, I understand what we're trying to do, but it doesn't mimic anything, in my opinion. And people say, hey, I'm going to teach them how to land. Like you can't teach anybody how to land. They land the way they're supposed to. So when somebody lands and they buckle in or buckle out, that's because that's all they can do. Now you can say, don't do that, and then they can try not to do that. But until you start looking up the chain, right, you're not going to know where to strengthen whatever it is so that when they land correctly. So I don't, people, they start in this small box and they jump off and they go, see, look, you just, you know, that we're getting ready to change that. And I say, well, add another 6 inches there. And they jump off and they buckle again. And I say, well, what's the difference?
Hmm.
Let's get strong. Let's start with some basic jumping and see repetitively they're going to get strong. I mean, you wouldn't want to not jump because now you're not fit to jump, let alone not very good at it. So you want to be able to start repetitively doing that. And again, a well-rounded, athletic performance, strength and conditioning program should be able to take that. I mean, that's not something that's weird.
For those that are using these landing, snap downs, hop and sticks
Yeah.
as essentially like a skill builder, if you will,
Yeah.
how would you help them to progress from that to actually reactive plyos, but without sort of, losing what is the intended outcome of what you want to get out
Right.
on in your sport?
Well, in my experience, strength takes care of that. Like, so let's take a little hyperbole as an example. Like, so volleyball, right? in the off season, we'll do plyometrics with them, but we do a lot. I got several boxes, right, to simulate a run up at when if they're outside hitters, their run up to hit, that kind of thing. So it'll be hop, box, 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 down, up, this kind of things. But these guys have been jumping a long time. These women have jumping a long time. But in season, we don't do any plyometrics at all. They're jumping all day long. Now we will do jump ups, so we get triple extension, but they'll land on top of a box, which is really no force at all. So I think if you look at practices, you have to include that as part of, all those jumps, just because they're not on a sheet that says 5 sets of, whatever, doesn't mean they're not jumping and there's some physiology happening. So I let practices handle that, right? And I don't, the way you're going to get strong when you land and repeat is to squat and to lunge and to step up. And, the idea of applying metric, they used to say it bridges the gap between strength and speed with that stretch shortening cycle. So that's going to get handled out there. And that's, the only way you can react to a chaotic environment is to be in a chaotic environment. And if you had a drill that was reactive, it's going to have to be chaotic. They can't know that that's going to happen. It's almost like this deceleration stuff. Like I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it because there's a cognitive aspect to that, right? That they say, okay, run as fast as you can to that cone and then stop. Well, in a game, you don't have that there. You could stop here, you can stop way down there, you can stop over there, but you don't know that. So you're already stopping earlier than you're supposed to be stopping. Let that happen throughout the match. There's enough of that happening. You just got to make sure you give the mechanics and put them in the position to be able to react like that, which is more controlled. Let practice and all that handle it. Let the sporting movement handle it.
I gotcha. I want to just stay on the sort of the jumping at the moment because you did
Sure.
mention jumping with arms, and
Uh,
obviously back on the force plates, everyone does force plate testing with. It's obviously the age old discussion. Do we have arms when we do jumping? Do we have no arms? Particularly when we're doing this on the force plate, right? Those that do have the argument with no arms, they're looking at it as okay, this is lower body strength and power. Versus if you do use your arms, you're looking at momentum and coordination from the arm swing. And what this looks like when you have the arm swing is what they say is like the double peak. You get the push off, and then you get that, which is the first peak, and then the second peak is obviously the arm swing, which can sometimes make it hard to interpret changes over time, right?
right.
So my question to you on both sides of the coin, particularly with the arms that you're mentioning, when you do use your arms for jumping, and you are doing this on the force plate as an example, yeah, how do you know if improvements or drops are coming from a true lower body output, strength and power, versus just better arm swing, better timing, better coordination, but better momentum?
Well, you don't. It has to be, you have to do it with that one person. You have to have them jump with no arms and then jump with arms. But that's why you don't jump with arms so that everybody's on the level playing field, right? So
Mm.
you want to look at lower body without arms. I mean, I guess you could get really intricate and talk about limb length, but we're looking at it where let's just take the arms out so that we know that we're looking at just the lower body reactivity. We have to group it like that. We can't be specific about knee angle or that his legs are longer than my legs and all that. Now, volleyball, that's the touch in volleyball, right, is important. So they don't really care what your vertical jump is in volleyball. They care how high you can touch. And so how you get there, they really don't care either. So at the same time, we look at, some of the world's greatest players, and we know over in Europe, there's some, 6'7" to 7 foot tall middle blockers now, right? So now it's critical to be able to touch a certain height. So now it's height and all this other stuff and how high you can jump. So I call that a sports performance measurement. Vertical jumps that we're doing are athletic performance to give us an idea of what kind of lower body development's happening while we're looking at power and we're looking at strength. Where do we need to fix that? So I think the value of the force plate looking at no arm jump is to see the speed of descent, to see the time to take off, all those things, to see the impulse, to see where we can now affect the training to change those things positively. The arms are, nothing you can really teach, right? But that means now you can compare everybody. And then when you do it departmentally, now I can compare the basketball team to the soccer team or to the swimming sprinter, that it wouldn't matter. So I rarely use arms at all. Volleyball would be the only sport that we would do it, that I would be in charge of anyway.
Thanks for answering those. I'm gonna obviously we see a couple of raised hands in the participants, so I'll come back. I got a couple more, but I want to get these guys to ask, have their opportunity to ask. So, Evan, if you want to just unmute, I believe it's David Stodden who's on
Yeah.
there. So it's unmute him and David.
Hello, Dr. Alejo. Good to hear from you.
Oh,
Always
how
appreciate
nice.
it. So I got a question for you,
Yeah.
and you can imagine
Wait,
where
are
this
you going to
comes
ask me,
from.
are you going to ask me a question that you already know the answer to? So you better not put me on the spot, wise guy.
No, no, I won't put you on the spot. But question,
Yeah.
do you think we should train rotational performance using the same fundamental principles as you do to run faster and jump higher? Specifically, dynamic rotational strength slash explosiveness versus what seems to be promoted as everything we do has a stable core.
Oh God. Just so you guys know that when I was with the A's, Dave would meet me in Texas and we would talk about, at the hotel about some of these things that nobody, he's been at some really good places, right? To look at biomechanics. Well, I think first of all, people lose the fact that without the legs, the core really is not even going to be happening. So all this stuff without the legs, and you're trying to make sure but that's not how the body works. I mean, you're especially in a rotational event where everything's coming from your toe to wherever, if you're throwing an implement or delivering a punch or whatever it is, I mean, I think the whole body's got to be involved. So when you do a side plank, it's hard, but I don't really find, when are you going to do that? I mean, I don't find that. I mean, I think you do all these chops and lifts. I like the idea of that because they're dynamic. But I think also putting both feet on the ground and being able to move is important to be able to get that full thing. I do like, though, and I think you would agree, right? I do like anti-rotation stuff as well, because that could be something that's like, there's so much hitting going on, value, right? That may feed the actual movement of rotation that you're doing that isometric. I do think if we go back over core training, we haven't seen anything that is earth-shattering enough that it's a game changer. We haven't seen any core training make you throw harder, jump higher, run faster. We haven't seen any of that, but we're doing all kinds of core training. I don't get it. I really don't get it. Now, I like the anti-rotation part, but that just makes sense to me because we have pattern overload. So I think, like, we just go the other way, if we're going to try to eliminate that. But if you do think about it a little bit, we don't see a ton of oblique problems, right? I mean, we see some, but when people talk about throwing a baseball in core strength, I think that's almost an absurd notion, to try to figure out how much velocity of that 100-mile-an-hour pitch comes from the core. I want to find out who can figure that out. I don't see it. I just don't see it.
Thank you.
He agrees. He's he's taught me well.
Thanks, David. Got one from Chris White. Nice for you to join us, Chris. Oh wait, yeah, there he is, Chris.
There we go. Hey, Coach. Great to
Chris,
hear
how are
from
you? Yeah,
Good.
you too, brother.
Hey, this is somewhat more on that path, but more kind of philosophically and just with all of your history, it's good to hear. Do you think, like, looking back, is there anything that kind of the overall profession kind of overcorrected on, given kind of the shift towards more VBT training and monitoring?
Yeah, VB training.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the answer. Not that it's not of value,
right.
but in fact, there was at some point I called Brian. Brian Mann's a great guy, and I wouldn't say he's the father of this whole thing, but he pushed it out far enough so that we can kind of understand it, right? But I was talking to him about you can't tell me people are taking the average power of a power clean from the floor when there's two distinct speeds. And he's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. No, no, on and on." And we also talked about, I mean, so Brian's a huge power lifter, by trade. And, again, we talk about people lost sight of the equation. They think I'm just going to lift weights fast and I'm going to create more power, when in fact that's not the truth at all, because power is a compromise between strength and speed, right? So doing something fast doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to create more power. And I think that's what the fundamental loss is. I mean, look, I'm no brilliant guy. I mean, I try to surround myself with guys like Dave Stodden. So when I say something, I know I'm right because I know Dave Stodden's right, or Joey Antonio, or Jeff Stout, or, I mean, some of these, I mean, big leaguers, right? To think that, I mean, it's just common sense. You got to go back to the basics of science. Physiology hasn't changed in the human body for I don't know how long. Now, what we understand about it has changed. We know more about it from people like Valor, or, Hawkins dynamic, or some of this other stuff. We can see that, right, biomechanically, and some other, like heartbeat, First Beat. Is that the name of the company? Okay. So we can see things better, right? But the fundamental David Costill, that kind of stuff that was laid down years ago, DeLorme Watkins back in whenever that came up with the three sets of six, I mean, that just you gotta realize that. And so the one thing I was smart about was to make sure that I followed the science. When I first started going to NSCA conferences, frankly, I got tired of hearing, well, this is what we did at, and they said their college because we're national champions, and everybody hoarded over. I want to see what they're doing, right? It didn't take me long to figure out that, well, what program would you have at a smaller college, or a college who doesn't have a very good football team? Would you do the same thing? And we could see that now. I mean, look, I got a lot of friends that are working at these big schools that are going to be in this football playoff. And, my hope is that they would agree to a certain degree that the top 10 teams have pretty much the same players. I mean, so it's hard to say that so-and-so is a great strength coach. Look, they're in the football playoff. I'm sure they're not awful, but these players, they got the best of the best. And now, with the NIL, they got a good chance to really get the best of the best if they got enough funding. So how much is really happening there, in the strength program? So I just think you have to be careful, but the velocity based thing is got too carried away with just doing stuff fast and thinking that power is everything, and it is, but it's not moving lightweights fast. That's not power. I mean, that's lifting heavyweights fast is power. And so I think that there's been a huge overcorrection there. I mean, and I think spending too much time on the technology, trying to get, 20 metrics. I did catapult, and I'm pretty damn good at it. I've used like three metrics the entire time. Now, for injured people or certain seconds, it's good to have all those other metrics. But, I'm curious about those metrics, but not all those metrics are important. And so, like, I I just rely on the physiology, right? I mean, I look at, load per minute, because intensity drives everything. That's what I want to see. I don't care what the overall load is, because that doesn't mean anything to me. That doesn't tell me about the work. But when you tell me something's, the load per minute's up in the 90s, I know what kind of work that is. The 90% zone. I know what that means. People have gotten away from basic physiology and kinetics and kinematics for sure.
Thanks, Coach.
Yeah.
I want to actually build upon that because obviously things that have been embellished more in the industry. I want to know, in your time, are there any big rocks that were utilized quite heavily early on in your career, but now, for whatever reason, practitioners are overlooking those, big rocks in favor of the
Yeah.
little rocks? Because all you hear about is the one percenters. So
Mhm.
so basically, yeah, what are we overlooking?
Well, let's just take a look at load, right? Let's take a look at load, for instance. It's a perfect example. Martin Boucher does a great job of explaining it too. I can't remember the title of one of the papers he wrote. It was like all this data and really nothing to look at. Like this. So the one thing we've lost sight of is heart rate. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? So what we're looking at is a bunch of external load. This is how far they ran. Okay, so what? That's like saying, hey, what did you do on vacation? Oh, we went to Italy. Okay, well, that doesn't tell you about what happened. That just tells you what you did, right? That's the difference with athlete monitoring, right? When you say, "Oh, look at the load," I mean, baseball is like embarrassing talking about how, that's a load and this is a load, and even some of these other things that people are talking about in load. And I say, that doesn't tell me anything. That you're just, what's the heart rate? What's going on with the lactate there? What's happening with, there's so many things going on that I need to know about, and none of them is this is how heavy the load was. I don't really understand what that means. So let me give you an example. If I said to you, "Hey, I did a total of 21 reps on the bench press," and so you'd say, "Okay, like one set of 21, two sets of 10, five sets of four, and then one set of five." I mean, I don't. What does that mean? You wouldn't know. It could be anything, right? It could be one. It could be 21 sets of one. We see kind of these clusters things happening, which like not it's not new at all. But now if I said to you, I did the bench press today and I worked out at about 95%, almost exactly what that workout was like because the intensity is going to tell you what kind of that internal piece was about. It wasn't a set of five, maybe a set of one, and it wasn't like 20 sets either. So this is about happening, right? So it's the same thing with load and load monitoring. And then, come to find out the NBA does all this load monitoring and their conclusion was doesn't do anything. So, and you're right. Yeah, they could have called me over here and asked me that, and I'd have told them to save them a bunch of money.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think it's sometimes we're looking too hard in the wrong areas, right? And ultimately, at the end of the day, the athletes and how you recruit or scout is going to be the difference between winning or losing. And in a lot of ways, we sort of need to get out of the way of the athlete and let them do what they want to do, right?
I think
But
so.
well, yeah. But I got another question from an industry standpoint, because I'm sure you see it as well, and maybe this might hit sort of the right spot for people that tune in after. But every given week, you go on LinkedIn and you will see how am I say this in a very diplomatic way, like maybe discontent for some of the salaries that are being put out there for strength and conditioning positions, particularly from a GA level. This obviously shows me that there is a lack of respect for the role of a strength and conditioning coach, because if organizations tend to want to hire a strength coach for a very low sum, that sort of read between the lines, right? So in order for us to, instead of just continue complaining and nothing changes, what are your thoughts on sort of like how do we improve the industry so that we can all get paid and not having to work 90 hours a week and for 20K, you know what I mean? And struggle to put food on the family, or in a lot of cases, struggle to spend time with our families.
Right. Well, I think I talked about it a little bit at the end of the speech. I got on my stump there some. It's about aspiring to a higher level. I mean, the only way we can change it is to be part of it and make that change, right? I mean, nobody would consider, bitching and moaning about salaries and how many hours are working as a stance. That's not a stance. That's a complaint, right? So do something about it. Become an associate athletic director, become an athletic director at the high school level, become a senior associate athletic director, at lower college levels where you can impact athletes, right? So I think that the idea is to be part of it, or at least, if you can't be part of it, and it's something you don't want to do. And it certainly sounds like, people are looking for better workplace environment, which is, to have a life at home and to be able to not have to work all day long. The problem with those people is that they signed something, right? They signed something that says this is what I'm going to do, and then they start complaining about it. I don't know about you, Michael, but I I've signed and read everything I've ever worked at, so I know what I'm doing. It's not like, you signed it and you go, "What do you mean I got to work this 60 hours?" Like,
Yeah.
well, like that's ridiculous. So, there's that. And I also say too that, as a former assistant athletic director and senior associate athletic director, I've seen the ledgers before, and there's not a ton of money. And by that I mean when you see people build facilities, those are different line items than salary, right? They come from another budget. And you can't flop that stuff over. It's not like you and I who can take our savings account and plop money into our checking account. It's just
Yeah.
not like that. So that money's not as available as you think. Now, in today's environment, it's going to affect, unless you're working with men's or women's basketball or football, that whole thing's going to affect all the Olympic sports from the top to the bottom. I mean, you're going to see people dropping out of there. We're going to see lower salaries, certainly no increases. I mean, no, unless you got a school that's just pumping money left and right. But it also seems like it's just a money game now, right? So, if somebody says, "Hey, we got some extra money, let's get another athletic trainer or another PT," they're not thinking that way now. My guess is they're thinking about we could get a better player. I mean, more than that school and that school. But I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you come with a solution. I don't see very often somebody concerned about the working environment and then after the little rant say, "Here's what I propose." Don't see that. And I think that would be way more helpful. And I try to jump in there when I can with it. But I also got to be honest. It sounds a bit whiny. I mean, and again, that doesn't put us in a very good light either. And, I mean, it's not, again, the NIL and this whole thing has changed a little bit. So it's a little bit different that, track and field championships at Florida doesn't have as much weight as it used to have. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And yeah, so Matt Delancey, has got, a bowl full of national championship rings and conference championship rings. He's not held in esteem like he should be because of how things are now. So it's
Yeah.
uh, it's a little bit sad that way.
You go to any conference, you look at any of the strength and conditioning webinars, and it's always about, how to, like tonight, how to run faster, how to lift heavier, how to jump higher. There's never any crossover into the medical world, and we become one trick ponies as strength and conditioning staff that blow a whistle and yell very loud and nothing really gets done. It's good to see David Romero here on the call as a PT. You have to bust AJ's balls because he didn't make it, but at least we got the sports medicine PT representative on a strength and conditioning webinar, which I enjoy. But I think the question is that like, how would you best encourage strength coaches to at least explore other parts of, sports medicine, sports science, return to play, whatever have you, to diversify themselves? Because what's happening right now is the medical world does not know anything about the strength and conditioning world, and the strength and conditioning world probably knows even less about the
Yeah.
medical world. And we're suffering because we are sort of not talking to each other. And at the end of the day, the athletes that we speak of, that we love so much, are suffering. So, again, I'm very long winded in saying that, but my question back is how would you encourage young strength coaches, or even young PTs or athletic trainers, to explore other areas so that there is this high level of collaboration moving forward?
That's a tough question. I mean, it really is because it's just something that you want, it's in your blood, right? And so I would have to say I'd be remiss if I didn't say I felt that way, in my 25th to 30th year in the profession. So I've already had my run at the director of strength and conditioning. In my 43 years, I've been the director for, I don't know, 27 of them, or 37 of them. So it's not, I wouldn't say I've had my fill, but what I saw was, this is what I can tell you exactly what it was. I saw what bad strength and conditioning, physical therapy, athletic training, sports nutrition, sports science, senior staff leadership. I saw how bad that was, and I knew I could fix that, right? So that was me. Like I'm gonna fix that. And that's how I ended up eventually becoming, when I got offered the job at NC State, we want you to come. And originally it was going to be with men's basketball. I was with the A's at the time. I said, okay. And then they called me back and said, hey, we've kind of changed our mind. And I thought, oh, and they said, we'd like you to be in charge of everything, including football. And I went, oh, well, that's going to cost you some extra money, right? And they said, yeah, that's fine. I mean, because they're now Debbie Yow's there, they're going to build this thing. And then it struck me right away that here's my opening, and I want to be called an assistant athletic director. And the guy says, "Well, I don't care what you call yourself." I said, "Okay." So I started with that, and that gave me the ticket to move in and be able to have enough skin in the game to jump up, right? Hey, what are we doing here in nutrition? I mean, my kids love to come to work with me because there's like Halloween candy at our nutrition station. It's like ridiculous. We don't have, where's our protein? Whatever. Turned me on into wanting to do, and then I started reading more about the high performance manager, things that were going on in New Zealand and Australia and over in Europe. And I thought, man, this is the thing. This is it right here. This is what I want to do. And so the idea is if you're somebody out there who wants to have a big impact on athletes, if you're working with one or two teams, let's say the teams are 15 apiece, right? So you have a really good impact and a good case of leadership with 30 people. But if you're the director of the strength and conditioning staff, now you have an impact on 300 or 500 athletes, right? But only in strength and conditioning, which is an important part, but we know it's not the only part. But you back up even farther and you become the high performance manager, and now you're over the entire performance unit. Now you're in charge of everything that's happening there in terms of the best health and welfare delivery system. That's what turned me on to that. Now I can help. Now, I'm not going in there and telling the athletic trainers, hey, we need you to do more ultrasound, or strength coaches, hey, we need to do more power cleans, or nutritionists, we want to make sure we have more protein. I'm just making sure that we're doing the right things, that we have best practices going on. And like I talked about, we have a shared consciousness of what we're all doing. And that whole part comes in. Hey, look, if you don't like your athletic trainer, or the athletic trainer doesn't like the PT, or the PT doesn't like the nutritionist, hey, look, I've been in pro sports. We don't all like each other, but when we get in the room, that's one thing that we did in Oakland, and the great teams have done this all over, not just in baseball. They don't hang out and climb trees together, right? They they do go their own ways, but when you're in that room in your one band, I mean, our group in Oakland, we couldn't have been more diverse except for one thing, and that's winning baseball games and with effort and consistency and brotherhood and all that. And so that's what you want to do. So what I'm saying is, if you don't like them because of how they do their work, you're saying that guy sucks. That's not what you should be saying. What you should be saying is, hey, look, I'm not telling you to do this and that, but that, right? I don't want to do your job, but you're not helping me do mine, right?
Mm.
Football guy's on my ass because he wants Michael Macri and Evan Magnuson to put on, 20 pounds apiece. I can't do that while you're not feeding them right. I can't do that if they don't have, at least 1 pound or 1 gram per pound of protein, and with, whatever. You're not doing that. I need that done. So that's the whole idea. And that's why I say when I talk about Oakland, when I went there, started as the head strength coach there, the first strength coach in their history. And I got there when not every team in baseball even had a strength coach. So what I say about Oakland is people always talk about, just let me do my job, just let me do my job. And the great places I've been where it was really good, I mean, really good, not only did they let me do my job, but they helped me do my job. They here, let's do this, let's do that. Hey, we're talking, we're talking, we're talking. And that's where that shared consciousness and the shared communication and, the agreed upon process makes a big deal. And so if you really don't like the system you're in, or you don't like the practitioners that are there, it's probably because they're not helping you. You need to bring that up. It doesn't need to be me, 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 me. It has to be, no, no, you need to help me.
I just want to say I definitely appreciate your entire talk today. I've learned a lot of great information in here, and also want to say nice to see you, Mike. And I'll definitely be giving AJ shit for not making it tonight. But I guess quick question here from
Yeah,
from a PT lens, and I'm sure you've
yeah.
seen this 1,000 times with athletes coming back from an injury now ready to re-enter into the weight room. Are there any common pitfalls that you see often that could have been easily cleaned up in the prior rehab phase prior to entering back into weight room phase with the coaches?
Yes, but not with a PT. I think the PTs now are probably crossing farther into what we do than what athletic trainers think you're doing. So, um, and that's not bad. I like it. I mean, I like the two therapists that, or I'm sorry, yeah, the therapists that were with us in Anaheim. In fact, Robbie Williams was one of them, and we went out to dinner. I think one early spring last 2 years ago. It's the first time I heard a PT say the word power. I was startled. I was like, what? What? I've never heard that before, and, came to be really good friends. And we worked together because I did some of the work with some of the players that were coming back and they were in the weight room and helped out. But it was probably more with the trainer side. Now, not to say that it doesn't exist PT. I just, I've been around more athletic trainers and physical therapists. The colleges that where I was at the time didn't have any PTs, ATCs. But the problem is, if it's returned to the weight room, I mean, let's get, and you know this, David, I'm just going to say it because it's going to be taped, that when we talk about return to play, there's a lot of return to something way before return to play, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, it's return to weights, it's return to running, it's return to jumping, it's return to practice, no contact, it's return to practice, controlled contact, it's return to, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I just want to make
exactly.
sure everybody knows that. But in terms of the weight room specifically, I had to, at Northridge, I had to go in and kind of watch. So one of the things that leadership at the performance manager level is presence, right? You have to be. All I spent, all day. I didn't sit in my chair. Arrived early enough. I trained soccer a little bit, so I was with soccer early in the morning. But I didn't sit in my chair until probably 1 or 2 o'clock because I was in the weight room, sports medicine clinic, the nutrition room, the pool, the court, the pitch, the track, and then back again. Just kept going because you need to see those things. And the people that were in charge of that before, which are typically well underqualified, these senior associate athletic directors who are history majors or business majors or whatever the hell they are, certainly not covering, the performance unit. You never see them. They're never around to watch you. And then they wonder why all those catastrophic incidents has happened, 10, 15 years ago, as if that wasn't happening before, right? So I walked around and watched. And one of the things I noticed in athletic training was to say with, knee injuries specifically, was that, they were squatting and they were lunging, but it wasn't the same technique that was happening in the weight room. So I had to sit them down and talk about that a little bit. And so what I came up with was like, look, this is where the shared language comes in with that one slide. You have to have a shared language. So when I read the injury report, we all have to know what, is available means, right? We have to also know that is available for practice, but not the game. Okay, why is that? There's got to be something else in there that says that he can go full go in the practice, but he can't play in the game. There's got to be something there. So we have to have that shared language. And part of that shared language is there's no such thing as a rehab squat. It's either a squat or it's not, right? And so you have to have standardized protocols, right? Standardized testing, standardized protocols, which is, here's what a squat looks like. Here's the criteria for a squat. Here's the criteria for a lunge, a press, an overhead, whatever it is, right? And we all do the same thing because if you're returning to the weight room and you're ready to go, unless there's some extraordinary limitation, you should be able to perform every exercise that you did when you were healthy. And at some point, I'm not clearing you as the strength coach until you can at least do 90% of your previous 1 RM. I'm not releasing you. So I got to make sure that you come out of the training room and the therapy room squatting the way we squat in the weight room. or lunging the way we lunge or doing overhead presses or clean or whatever. And that's the big gap I think that we saw. And that's the way I also test too, right? You got to test the technical failure because then your test numbers are way off, right? Even if you have somebody cleaning that comes to a place where their butt raises up first instead of like it should, where your head is going together, it kind of your butt kind of comes up and then your head comes. That's no good. I don't care if you do, quote unquote, clean it. That's not a clean. So it's no good. So I think the criteria, the standardized protocols of testing and the standardized protocol for exercise execution have to be very clear. That's probably the biggest issue, I would think, at most places.
Sure. Yeah, and I couldn't agree more and completely agree with all of that. And I think, having a shared language, that was something I kind of wrote down in my notes too. I love that. I feel like that is a huge disconnect sometimes. If we could all speak the same language, we wouldn't be having
No
some of
doubt.
same and us having some of those arguments that we're having. But we're all saying the same thing, just have slightly different language, but being on the same page with everything is huge.
Yeah, and it can't be saying the same thing with different words, right? So it's like saying when I say go, that it means something else to somebody else. No, it means go, like we're going, so it's got to be, so it's like reverse. Is it a reverse lunge? Is it a step up? Is it a one-legged squat? What is it? And you got to all say the same thing. And here's the other reason you got to do that, because you might be sick that day and you got to work with somebody and you don't know what the word is. He's got his own language. I mean, I'm sure that happens at most of the places. It's not right. Somebody could get hurt, right? I mean, you could get hurt by not knowing what that exercise is. And they say, well, I think what he meant here was. So if that happens, you got a huge chance for some big errors and things that could be, very detrimental.
Awesome. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, let's hear from David Stoughton. I know I'm saying both your last names, Davids, but just trying to differentiate between which David I'm talking to. Yeah, so take it away, David.
Yeah, thanks again. Bob, how do you make the mundane slash boring and basic slash fundamentals more attractive, specifically for long-term athletic development focus?
Yeah, that's a. I don't think that's a tough question, but it is a tough instance, right? I think the only thing you can do, and this is why I say before we do anything in the room, we got to assess, right? I don't want anybody working out, jumping, running, doing whatever until we get an assessment, because I want to make sure we get them right at the very beginning so we can start tracking progress, which we should see within 4 to 8 weeks, somewhere in there, right? Either more reps at a given weight or a PR, a time, something like that. Maybe we got an extra inch vertical jump on somebody who we just corrected, right? Or somebody, you can really, excuse me, when you change running mechanics, when you try to economize the run, if you can just do that, somebody's going to run faster immediately. So now those results should be the thing that spur these people on to, oh, this is great. We can just keep doing that. Because yeah, I mean, that's the only thing you have to look forward to because you're doing the same things all the time. And as we get older, like you and I are, we have this whole body of work that says, well, look at all we did. These guys did the same thing. These women did the same things as you did, that you are going to do. And here's the results that we had. And we can't take the elevator to the penthouse. We got to go step by step. We can't skip any steps here. Because you're probably, when you start bringing up the idea of, that's when injuries happen, and so we don't want that to happen either. So that whole process of fundamental work really it gets exciting when it comes to exam time, which is the test periods, and usually, you're going to see some progress, and at the same time, you got to be able to explain no progress too, right? And not explain yourself out of it, but it's got to be an honest approach because, everybody, you may be finding out that what fundamentally works most of the time for most of the people means that not everybody gets that happening, right? So you have to be able to say, hey, look, you got your arms are longer. It's like my son, right? We talks about the bench press. Well, he's getting, tall, but he's got really long arms. So he's talking about his bench press. And I said, well, you got a big strike against you, man. When you have long arms. And he said, well, so-and-so's benching, a little bit better. And I say, well, his arms are short and he's shorter than you. So that's different, right? But he's also fast. And I say, part of the reason you're fast is because you got longer legs. You can spread out a little bit versus somebody else who's shorter, who has to create way more force in the ground to catch up to you, and they just can't. So that's what we talked about a little bit, but I just think the results are the key for me. There's nothing else to point to. I mean, especially if you're going into private practice with younger kids, I mean, they should be making gains every week, it would seem like. That's why you don't do anything. You run a 20-yard sprint and a vertical jump. That's all you need. And once they start doing anything that's push-ups, sit-ups, broad jumps, in about 4 weeks, they're jumping higher and running faster. And that's the result of, hey, mom, hey, dad, and then, when you get them into college, you find out that long-term athletic development is much longer than you think, because we still see kids putting, a significant amount of poundage, not hundreds of pounds, because you're going to make most of those gains early on, but they're still throwing on, you know, 10, 20 pounds when they're 22, 23, 24, right? On a squat, on a clean. I mean, they're still developing. So, I didn't say much in there, but I've worked with, again, some of the greatest athletes in the world, and a lot of those people were very strong, especially some of the throwers and football players. I've really only gone to that elite complex style, and I know I did it with Jackie Joyner because I had to, but with Mike Powell a little bit, Kevin Young some, but uh, probably 2 or 3% of the programs I've written in 40 years have been that kind of Star Warsy sort of, like mad scientist shit, like, okay, here we go. Everything else was just what I showed you on the pictures. Squat, press, and pull it. That was about it.
How well do you think that data is translated to the medical side of the equation to better understand pathways and if you've got that baseline data and you track it
Yeah.
long term, how much is that
Yeah.
going to tell you about the potential for injury?
We do know that injury is multifactorial, right? So I mean, that's a tough one to cross, right? You can't say we squat, benched, and pulled, and here was our injury results. I mean, I guess you could, but there's so much more happening, around, mitigation. But we also know that, and I know you know this, that you can't prevent injury, because if you could prevent it, then you'd know when it was happening. You could predict it. So I don't worry about it. Although my track record's been pretty damn good with injury rates being low, and I would assume it's just almost like noise, the noisy data that just happens, right? But I mean, you can't also say squat, bench, and pull, because then now you're talking about intensities, you're talking about volumes, mechanics, body types, and all that. Is that kind of what you're asking me, or did you have an underlying theme that you were looking for?
Well, your track record's pretty good, which means you got to have some metrics to say that why it's pretty good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I go to basketball at NC State. When I first got there, we had nobody jumping over 40 inches. In 5 years, we had six guys jumping 40 inches, and they had a couple of 42s and threes. So, I mean, and we didn't have any knee stuff. We had one tibia go down, which I don't think had anything to do with it. So we had to have that bar go down the front of his leg and all that, and brought him back, and actually used catapult to take to him to get him back. It was at one time I was really using jump metrics, off the catapult. We found out that in a drill, it was a rebounding drill, that his load was really low. And I'm thinking, how's that possible? When I looked at his jumping, it was really low because he's afraid to get up. So in that one drill, instead of him laying up, I made him dunk. So he starts dunking. Now this thing goes off the charts jump wise, because now his load goes up, and now all of a sudden he's better. And he was squatting, and this is while he was already squatting 90% of his max and clean. And he came back, and he wasn't really sore, but he just wasn't jumping up. And I'm like, I can't clear this guy. He's not jumping right. He's not getting his full extension. So that was something that didn't have anything to do with force or training. You just had to keep an eye on it. But
Kind of gets
I
into the
think
art of the science, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I really, yes, I would say this that, over the last 20 years when I sit down, and I learned this all from track and field, the periodization, like I have one piece of paper I write my programs on, that's it. It's got that 42-week band at the top and then all the exercises listed and all the intensities and volumes written in. I write that paper up in the first day and I never write more than that. I'll go in maybe and adjust, but I've got all the days, all the games, all the playoffs, all summers and all that. And it's already laid out. And when I do that, that's the funnest part. It's funner than coaching. I mean, I love coaching, but it's just to me, it's artistic. In the beginning, it's not, right? It's you trying to figure out what the hell's going on. But after a while, it becomes very artistic, and you can, you know, the only way to predict the future is to plan it. And I can do that on a periodization schedule.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Well, thanks, Bob. Really great presentation. I actually think the question and the Q&A was actually longer than your presentation. So it just goes to show just how much,
That's okay. I like it.
yeah,
It's
we got
good.
out of it. But obviously, for those that have turned up tonight, and for those that will be watching this, that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
I would just say my emails, it's bobbyalejo@outlook.com, BOBBYALEJO @outlook.com. Go ahead and email me and happy to answer anything. I know for sure that, I was talking to Scott Livingston this morning on a podcast, and he was asking me about, some of my impetus behind continuing after 40 something years. And I say, I feel an obligation to all those that have contributed to me. I'm like a quilt, I mean, all this patchwork of people offering me help, and David's certainly one of them. It's one of those people that just, so I feel like it's great to give back and continually talk about my experience, at least now. And most of you on here will find out at some point when you get older that now you don't have to worry about theories. Now you got examples, and that's where I'm standing these days. So I don't have to guess anymore, and hopefully I can help you guys not have to guess.
Well, thanks again, and I appreciate everyone for joining us in tonight's webinar. Over the next 24 hours, get an email with basically all the information on YouTube, and again, as well as information on how we can get in touch with Bob. We'll add that to it, and how you can get in touch with us if there's an interest in learning more about Valor. Obviously, we've got a big 2026 ahead of us. We're really excited about it. A lot of big year of content in the pipeline for the webinars. We have a couple of colleagues of mine that work in the NFL, college football, and college basketball that will be joining us this webinar series in the new year. So just make sure that you follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, valorvision.ai for all of them, or ValorVision AI on all of them. And that'll keep you up to date on the announcements for the new webinars in the new year. But obviously, thanks, Bob. Want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll catch you all on the other side.
Thank you, everybody.